Hey, Malek, thank you for coming in. You have a phenomenal history of contribution, of innovation across so many different domains, particularly in the healthcare biomedical innovation area. Just a marvelous background of leadership globally and regionally. So thank you for coming in and sharing your experiences with our audience.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for interviewing me. It's a pleasure and an honor for me. And I'm sure this experience will be valuable to learn about it and including myself, always learning from and meeting such people.
So, Malek, what were the three defining moments for you? And it could have been when you were 3 to 5 years old. It could have been when you were older, inside, outside the family, inside, outside of school. What are the three inflection points that created this marvelous career that you have and continuing to have?
Thank you very much. This is very valid and good questions. And I believe from me growing as a child up to my age of 18, then we go to the university. I think that was one reflection point. And part of it was influenced by my father, who was interested more that his son get educated in his home country. So one of the major points that was, although despite my other brothers and sisters left the country and went to Canada or went to USA, my father was interested in saying, well, we could get very good education in Lebanon. And that was the point where I participated in competitions. And usually the government universities, you participate in a competition to be nominated. And that participation, I do remember the numbers, like around 1,200 people participated all of the Lebanese university and engineering schools, and out of this number, they selected 250. And I was one of the selected person. About 250 people participated. And I do remember my graduation when we graduated, we were about when the branch where started with 136 people, and the graduated people were only 36 people on a different discipline. And I was graduated from electrical and electronics engineering discipline, which is dictated later on for me to go into the biomedical engineering. After less than a year, I traveled to Canada and get an acceptance to do my master in biomedical engineering, and in specific in clinical engineering at Polytechnique. And that, I would say, could be a good reflection point. So we would say two reflection points were addition to that one during my career. One of them means coming back from Canada in '94 and being working as a biomedical engineer at the Ministry of Health. In fact, after 2 years, I became the chief biomedical engineer at the Ministry of Health. And the other one, I would say my work at UCLA. Well, I think we will talk about those two job which is, in my opinion, that influenced my career. And I would say the reasons for those two influences were more dictated by the people. And at the Ministry of Health, I believe the ideal person was the Minister of Health, which is we still friends and contacts. He was the Minister of Health of UAE. And I do remember my first projects was at hospital called Tawal Hospital, is located in Abu Dhabi, Emirates. And I supervised the installation of the first MRI, and that was in 1984. And following this, steps and being welcoming the receptions of these restorations, I do remember the Minister of Health came to me, and he was very, I would say, decent person, very deep knowledge and experience and wisdom. and he said, Malek, I want to congratulate you personally. I mean, if you have friends or anyone who is like him, who has a biomedical engineer, who want to come from Canada and be part of the Leasing fellows with the Mental and Biomedical. And here you have a clear plan. You have the time and the investments in the luxury to invest in our hospitals. So please do your best. And I do remember that very well. The 5 years I spent in the Ministry of Health. It was amazing for me. It's like an experience that for each year compared to 3 to 5 years experience in Canada, where UAE was keen to acquire the technology from a company like that and develop the healthcare systems in a faster way that they can be at the top leads in the world. And that was the strategy that the governments which managed almost to work on acquisitions of almost $200 million worth of equipment for the governments in the different hospitals at the Ministry of Health. I mean, that was an amazing for me experience. Again, experience on the technology and experience on the executions and how to do it in an environment very different. Just remember, like if you are in Canada or in Spain, then your role as a biomedical engineer is very defined in terms of execution. So you have a very specific role to fulfill this role, and then you do best with children. While the work in you coming from Canada, it was a very often wide role in that you have to put all the bits and pieces together. And that was, in my opinion, a great experience for me to learn what other aspects that we put together to come to a realization of a proper projects. And in that type of relationship where you want to deal with constructions, you want to deal with water, electricity, you want to deal with so many people. That experience by itself, in my opinion, was an amazing experience for me to gain market time. And having a background in engineering mindset, how to do that was very interesting. That one step. The other step, after spending 5 years at after the Ministry of Health, I left and joined an organization called the ECRI Institute, and it's a medtech house based out of Philadelphia, run by a gentleman whose name Dr. Joel Logan, who was a friend, mentor, and a wisdom man. And I think this person also had big influence over my shaping of understanding how to deal with healthcare business. ECRI was managed and run by Dr. Logan, and he was a gentleman that was has a background as a neurosurgeon, but by his experience itself, I mean, he was more engineer than anyone else. And then he was inventor for so many patents in US. But he was the first person to write about digital asset management as a software to manage the assets in the hospitals, and that was in the 1970s. Before anyone touched that space in terms of development. So this gentleman, he was not only a physician, he was a more philosopher. So he used to come, spend time in international with I from the office for 7 years, from the leadership of this gentleman. On every visit that we came, I have learned something about him. So his wisdom was like a man who listened carefully to everyone around him, and is a man who can speak to a minister of health, and he can speak to the keyword on the hospital. He has the power of let's say wisdom, and the power of language, and the power of how to communicate with anyone on there. And that by itself, to learn is something interesting. Like you need to master the language of each discipline or each, let's say, type of work in order to be able to communicate properly. And that interesting part of me. So I have learned a lot from these gentlemen. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2017, but I still remember the very close to them. I still have very good memory of all of the discussions that we had at several stages, different interactions with the students.
Okay, so let's kind of mine a little bit earlier. You indicated that um, you had this program in your host country, in your native country, where you could then study abroad, right? But before that, you had an interest in engineering, biomedical engineering. That came from your father?
Yes, and kind of you want to say it's my father who was not an engineer, who had a degree in law, but he had something in his mind, which is like we were 5 kids, 1 daughter and 4 boys. But he said with his plan, like we should make an engineering company. So he was kind indicating like everyone, and like unfortunately, my uh, elderly brother, he became a doctor, a physician, a dermatologist. But my sister, she's an architect. Another brother who was a civil engineer, and me, electrical, electronics backgrounds, and the younger one was mechanical engineer. So I'm kind of incited by my father on his certain days that maybe he could work an engineering company and he could employ all of his sons.
I see. So that was kind of a catalyst for your interest in engineering, but really spawning interest in all the different kind of professional disciplines that came really into your family. Now, you ended up initially with electronics engineering and bachelor's degree from Lebanese University, and you had an interest though in science and engineering. Was that a curiosity when you were a child as well?
100%. And I believe for me, as of now, even, I believe the most important element in my career path is the curiosity. So having a curiosity on understanding how things function, or how the world behind us is working, was the first instigation for me to go into the electrical and electronics engineering, and then later on to the biomedical engineering, which was a continuation, because at my end of 5th years doing the electronics engineering, my thesis was around ECG. So it was initiated kindly by, before I finished my electronics degree, and to go into this area, which is always fascinated me, that the intersection of two disciplines, where we're talking about medicine, we're talking about engineering. And that, which is, I believe, interesting, it created the greatest curiosity from my side to go into biomedical engineering.
Yeah, and then you have this special program where you studied clinical and biomedical engineering, a master's degree at the Polytechnique in Montreal, right? And additional study at McGill University. So what was that experience like in studying in Canada?
That it was amazing for me, coming from a totally local understanding, which is a Lebanese university, going to a university which is we call Polytechnique. It's only an engineering school which has almost 30,000 of students, which is kind of the house of engineering in Canada in terms of developing this area. So it interests me very well in terms of continuing this area. And in specific, earlier I did not have chosen to go into clinical engineering, which was the second steps. When I knew about the program, I switch automatically because it was a longer program to do the master engineering with the clinical engineering background, because it's going to require at least 6 to 9 months of training in a hospital environment, which I did, and which interests me more than to do the master science of engineering as a discipline. And this experience by itself also opened the door for me some other areas where I followed at McGill University, where the work I have done it during my hospital residency related to the program was more into the radiation safety space, where McGill were very well known in this area in terms of doing radiation safety and radiation protection, which I followed a couple of courses at McGill Universities and understanding more how it functions and how to again this discipline as a part of the biomedical engineering or medical physics departments. In terms of learning things, I mean, it was also an amazing experience for me to be in between the Polytechnique and McGill University, developing this model. And at the end, I spent almost 2 years at Montreal Heart Institute, then following after my residency to work with one of the senior staff in terms of helping them to develop a software related more to the radiation safety discipline on how to monitor the people working inside the hospitals and get exposed to more like imaging departments, what type of radiation you get exposed to, how you avoid that one, how you reduce these type of activities. And that put me directly into the hospital for almost 2 years at Montreal Heart Institute.
I mean, it's kind of fascinating because you're a registered professional engineer in Montreal, Quebec, and certified clinical engineer by the American College of Clinical Engineers. And you did some technical sales for Logic Innovation as well, right? And on PCs, LAN, and software and hardware.
That was my first employment in Canada during the time that I started to kind of finishing my degree, started to work on my sales. And that was probably early days for like PC networks, LANs, and stuff like that, which is an interesting part also for my life to understand the sales aspects and how to do that. And it was an amazing experience for me also to learn how to combine to work with the learning education and in the same time in order to gain the experience at first.
Yeah, and then you already mentioned this, but biomedical engineer at the Montreal Heart Institute, right? And quality control for diagnostic imaging and radiation exposure monitoring, and because you did some additional courses at McGill. And so, again, a really famous kind of work, and then chief biomedical engineer at Taiwan Hospital, right? Or Tamwan Hospital, I should say. UAE Ministry of Health, and leading. Can you talk a little bit more about that Taiwan Hospital?
And that were, as was a part of the Ministry of Health in Taiwan hospitals, to be honest, when I got the phone call, in Canada, someone calling me from the HR departments of the Ministry of Health and saying, well, speaking in Arabic to me and say, look, you are Malek El Husseini? I said, yes, this is me. And he say, well, are you interested to come to work in the United Arab Emirates at the Ministry of Health? And saying, yes. And I say, okay, can you come next week? No, it cannot be like that. I'm much interested, but there is so many steps that need to happen before they can come. And he said, okay, tell me what you want. And I told them, look, in order for me to move, I need to give notice at least for a month for my existing work so I can move. Two, I need to understand what is the condition of the work, whatever. He said, don't worry, Malek, you're going to be happy. Tell me which dates you're going to be the first time date that you can make it come to you. And that was 1st April 1994. They said, go Malek, collect your tickets from this place. You're going to come and join us, and I'm sure you're going to be happy in this country. And to be honest, since 1994, April 1994, I am in here and being based and working from here and being on the I've always enjoyed learning. So the experience which I got it at Tawan hospitals, I was based in Tawan Hospital, but I was working at the Ministry of Health in different positions. Worked as a Tawan as a chief biomedical engineer for the Ministry of Health in Tawan Hospital, and it was an interesting hospital that acquired the latest technology, the best technology, and having staff which originally started from Germany and then later on from USA, and then modulated and later on with the mix of the people. So I had to deal with more than 40 nationalities in the hospitals with different perspectives on how to do the business and different mindset. Talking from the clinical perspective with the director of nursing from USA, with the chief medical officers from Sweden, and the CWAE, and dealing with the people that get me this kind of exposure. It was very interesting for me because I was not just dealing with the acquisition of equipment, I was dealing with the maintenance and supervising about a team for 25 people that do the maintenance for the hospital. And the other exposure get it is dealing with the budget. So I was responsible to validate and approve for each department what type of requests that need to come to the department next year, and what their budget, what type of equipment should come. So kind of after my success story for 2 years, the Ministry of Health, they say, well, how about we using you to acquire the other hospitals' weapons? So I was nominated under the Ministry of Health as a part of the selection committee for all the technologies comes to them. And here where I had the bigger exposure in order to be with the other hospitals, their needs, and dealing with the latest technology and the requirements in the different hospitals. And that by itself, it was a great exposure for me. And that's why I was mentioning that this type of experience was quite enough to cover many years of my experience in Canada. And that discipline is definitely having no boundary about the actual work in terms of what to do and how you put it together. So I had to bring so many other elements, develop my skills, keep myself up to date all the technology, and helping the Ministry of Health to form their model of how to do the acquisitions of medical programs and ensure that technology is used in the right space.
Then you become Director of Middle East for ECRI. Can you define ECRI Institute? Who are they?
That's the ECRI Institute is an abbreviation for something called Emergency Care Research Institute. And today it's a non-profit organization based out of Philadelphia, created by a person who's named Dr. Joel Noble, which I mentioned earlier. He's a physician by background. He started this organization in 1961. And he was amazed by the engineering side, but his mindset was almost focused on patient safety. And that's how he developed the organization. So we go to any hospitals today in the US, and you're going to find a reference about ECRI, for the biomedical engineering, and the reference related to the patient safety, related to the medical equipment of the usage of it. So this organization was a kind of a boutique consultancy group that focused on medtech, focused on design planning for hospitals. So I've tell you, the real learning I've learned in the biomedical engineering field was into those who were first being mentored by Dr. Joel Noble as a person and as a doctor who has the knowledge and the experience, and two, by the interactions with the teams. So the 300 people who works in this organization, they have the depth, the knowledge, the expertise. And then most of learning, it was not only in the area of the medical programs, where ECRI used to give guidance. It's on any equipment you want to buy, what your specs, what your budgets, which equipment has a better specification versus the other one. And that was, in my opinion, the direct impacts. But the indirect impacts, which is more interesting for me, into the working in medical planning. And the medical planning, like how you design a hospital, how you design clinics, how you serve a region, how you serve ministry account. And that levels that, in my opinion, impacted my career in terms of learning. And I had the chance to do one of the largest projects in the Middle East region, which was in Qatar, which called the New Hamad Medical Corporation. It was almost about $2 billion projects, which has under one roof 4 hospitals. And I had the chance to work with Dr. Noble on the projects. And I initiated the projects, and I believe it was one of the success stories which I achieved on the region. During the time of working at TBCY Institute, and this type of experience of designing a facility and working with the ministries of health and understanding the needs and how you project those needs to be translated to a space, and from the space working on the workflow and understanding where technology fits within these spaces, and understand the full spectrum that a hospital, how it works. And that gave me a very good understanding on hospital workflows, different departments, different disciplines, how they work together, and how you ensure the safety and the accreditation of the facilities in the.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a remarkable breadth of experience that you would gain in your leadership role there as well. And then you end up GE. Can you talk about that?
That was another big story. After spending 7 years at ECRI, I was headhunted by the HR group, which is part of GE Healthcare. And they say, well, Malek, would you like to join us when we have something interesting for you to work? And it was, in my opinion, amazingly like GE Healthcare. It was corporate structures, very well defined, well known around the world, but it was not more in the space of consulting. And this is where the intersections came in, where GE Healthcare started a discipline in the USA, which is called performance solution. And this team was supposed to support many diagnostic imaging centers or hospitals to look at their performance, look at their workflows, and come with the implementation of improving the workflow and improving their efficiency so they can do better, and then they can buy more equipment from GE. And they wanted to start the discipline outside of the medicine. Then the choice was me to start this as the first head of performance solutions in the Middle East and Turkey, and seeing how we can improve performance in the regions and how we can make more impacts for the patients. And this is how I joined GE Healthcare in the Middle East, based out of Dubai, and having the performance solution teams, where our biggest success was the Ministry of Health in Saudi Arabia. And I do remember the discussions carried by a gentleman or a CEO who was the CEO of the National Guards in Saudi Arabia, and Dr. Abdullah Rabial. He was a very interesting character. He was a person well known in the space of separating Chinese kids. So he was already known in the world on separating the largest numbers of kids in Saudi Arabia. And he became the Minister of Health. And the first things that he passed about it for him, Jeff Emmett was the chairman of GME, that to implement the same implementation he should have done at the national guards, to go and do it at the Ministry of Health level to improve their efficiency in the moving their work. And that was an interesting project which was continued later on by my colleague when I shifted after 2 years and become the head of healthcare investment at GM. And that was very interesting for me in this space, it was always on my mind when we talk about investment in financing. I consider it being top tier because you need to understand the technology, you need to understand clinical aspects, and you need to understand the operations. And at the end, on top of it, you need to do the right investments. So I felt that working in the healthcare investment space is the top experience which I can get in terms of using all my skills, in terms of doing the work in one geographical area, which was the Middle East area, even specifically in the GCC country. So that work, which was done in the Middle East, which we created a fund, and that GE Healthcare was part of that fund, but was the main driver of this fund in the case. And we had the chance to invest in a couple of projects. Some of it started from scratch as greenfield. Some of it was like brownfield. But that type of experience, I believe, it was the top experience that I got it from GE Healthcare in terms of doing this activity. I mean, almost after 4 years, I had the chance to work as a general manager for one of the cardiology business for GE Healthcare. And it was a position which is covering about 84 countries, which gave me the exposure to go in geography, which I never visited before, like Russia, Central Asia, Turkey, Middle East, and Africa. And that was a very interesting space for me to go and learn about geography, while all my other experience was focused on the Middle East and specifically GCC country. And after that, by 2 years, I left and joined a healthcare fund. And I was approached by QFE, which is called Qatar Post Managed, which is we created a fund with $300 million focusing onto the Middle East and the area of work that covers whether it is hospital operations or medtech or anything that relates to healthcare space, but it was more healthcare investments portfolio group that works into this space. And then, after spending 2 years in these positions, I had the chance also to become the CEO of a medical leasing company that focuses on the GCC country, which was an interesting space when you talk about leasing and medical equipment, because that goes into the operation and finance. And that was a very interesting space, which is at the region still lacking, where we know leasing medical equipment is very in place in Europe, in USA, but still at the early stage into the Middle East, and in specific into the GCC. And that fits 100% will be strategy of the government of the GCC for privatizations and moving from being the investors and the operations into hospital, more to be regulators and let the private sector take the lead to come up into the assets, managing the assets, replacing the assets. And that was an interesting space also to understand and see how functionally can do that. And I had also to go back and work with the GE into the space, interacting with them, interacting with the Siemens on the couple of projects that also did the leasing for medical equipment. So it was an interesting area where that combines also the knowledge of the technology And beside that, the knowledge of the customers and their risk appetite, and understanding where you can take the risk and where you don't take the risk, and understand operationally where the success could happen and not to fall into so many risk area where you lease the medical equipment for this group or vessel.
And then you became asset manager, right? For C Capital.
Yeah, and the C Capital was very interesting space where I started to work with a couple of the folks were focusing into the area of investing, but more into the space of autism and rehabilitation. And that was an interesting space for me to understand more, because here we're focusing not only on the technology, but talking about the needs and the communications and the how we can improve the status of someone who has this deficiency, and how we fill the gap into the markets, and how we need to become a part of an integrating ecospace that help and support autistic people in order to rehabilitate them and put them back into the normal life. And I would say it was very interesting space, but it was hard for me and for the growth because it happened during the COVID issue. And for that, COVID had put so many restrictions in terms of interacting with meeting with people, interacting with the closely with the people, and that impacted the area of work in a big time. But it was also a hard learning for us in terms of doing the staff effectiveness.
And and then you have your journey now to UCLA Health. Can you talk about that?
Of course, and UCLA Health, it's a very interesting space for me because I was approached by friends and asking me, Malek, would you be interested after for C Capital that we have an interesting role, but we need to start to roll it kind of bits and pieces. But if you are interested, we have a group which is called UCLA Health. They are interested into the Middle East. And you could be a very good fit for them since you have the experience and the knowledge and the network and the communication with the different parties, that you support them in terms of rolling their strategy and plan into the Middle East. And it was really amazing for me to learn from an organization how it's structured, their interest in the Middle East. UCLA Health is not small. It's more than 10,000 employees, but the international teams was focused on about 40, 50 people. And they were very interesting, kind people, very smart people, and interested to learn and work in the Middle East. We had the chance to do the strategy, work with the team, develop what works, what doesn't work in the Middle East region, because they are new entrants to the regions, but they had the appetite and they are very careful on doing the right things at the right place. And still very interesting for me, these approach. I work with them, I support them. We had several projects in the regions, and one of them is, we're saying it's a big project. It's about $500 million. It's developed in Jordan, between an investment groups from Jordan and in Saudi Jordanian investment fund from Saudi Arabia. And the project is coming up along, and it's very interesting as a project, and that uses also my other skills in terms of medical planning, but at this levels and bringing the healthcare, in my opinion, to the regions is very important. It's kind of like you consider the right for every person to have the care and do good care. And I believe these type of projects with the mindset from UCLA having a very disciplined strategic positioning of UCLA in the regions is a mindset that works very well for what I believe in. And this interesting work is ongoing, and it's amazing. And it mixed of everything together, not only the healthcare, the planning, but the communications and the human side. And the UCLA is very unique on focusing on the aspects of the rights of the person to have the healthcare and the right of the person to have the education. So they have very good mindset that targets doing the healthcare, but doing the right things for the right people and educate them and let them run by themselves. And that disciplines is unique by itself because their objectives is to do the knowledge transfer, not to keep them dependent on discipline.
And then what are some of the other projects you're working on right now?
Right now, to be honest, since a couple of months, have been approached by healthcare funds out of the US. Well, I've joined them as an operative partners in terms of developing the strategy and the plan for the region. And I believe the interest in the region is going to grow big because of the privatization of the healthcare sectors and because of the interest of so many areas where we know that the hospital had been deployed in the missions, but there is still many other services in the area not covered in the Middle East, and specifically the GCC country, where you have the knowledge, you have the money, but you are not covering all aspects of healthcare disciplines that you need to be available within the ecosystems in order to do it a proper care for the patients and for the citizens. And that area is very interesting for being to work. The other type of projects which is also touch me is the work with the governments in UAE and Qatar on the space of organ donations. UCLA in USA is very well known as one of the largest centers doing all the transplants, organ transplants. And transferring this knowledge into the area of the GCC, I believe this is very interesting space because it has a human aspects and it has a technological aspects and it has clinical aspects. And we're working on this, and I believe this area will develop very fast in the missions because they have the means to do it, but they want to do it in the right way. So they are gaining first-hand of experience from people like UCLA in order to develop this to the regions and being at the top tier hospital that can offer this type of activities in their country.
Any other kind of projects like at manufacturing and things like that?
Well, manufacturing also, we have been talking about the manufacturing in the last a year or two. We had in mind with a group out of USA to do pharmaceutical manufacturing in Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, this gets slowed down a little bit by the regions, what's happening now, but earlier we had the mindset that this type of activity also should be included, and it was focusing more into as a building as a first stands as IV solutions, like the background, and developing more into area of injectables, area of that could comes later on top of the tier of pharmacs of the injectables, and that would be very interesting to the regions or to the fulfilling the needs to be gap into the space while importing these goods from overseas that could be located in the regions, then developing that locally with the local partners, with the partners from USA who can do well in terms of transferring the knowledge and working hand in hand with the partners from the GCC company that could be interesting onto the space.
You know, Malek, you have such an amazing background. I mean, you've done it all, literally, right? From capital management to biomedical engineering to innovation to managing projects. I mean, working across the entire system in every possible way that is for a person to be involved. And so you have so much expertise. So what would you like to do? What are some of the projects you would like to take on coming up?
Well, you said it rightly. I have gained over 32 years some good experience moving from the technical space to the area of operation management, and then to an area of the financing and accounting and investments. What is my dream is, when, especially into the GCC country, that we are able to bring together, some of the missing disciplines, whether it's pharmaceutical, manufacturing, or the area of developments that complete the healthcare systems, to bring all of those gaps to the regions. So that becomes healthcare services at the tip of the hands of the people in the regions. They don't need to travel all abroad in order to gain the healthcare services or available healthcare services. And by bringing those gaps to the regions and using them efficiently, I could fulfill my mission.
Well, I mean, you do everything, right? And I mean, let's say if somebody around the world wants to bring you on board, what's the process of how they would say, you know what, Malek, I need your expertise because you're trusted. You've got an amazing background from management to capital management to biomedical engineering to the entire healthcare spectrum. What if somebody in the audience says, you know, I need Malek's talent? How do they engage you?
You said I think the secret word is the trust. And this is what I have learned over my 32 years in the region. First comes the trust, and the things fall into place. If you don't have the trust of the people to give them the right advice or to give them the right opinion, you'll never be able to succeed on doing this. And that's, in my opinion, the first step. And step two, you need to have light concepts, because sometimes we feel sometimes some of the projects are too much driven commercially. But I believe always healthcare projects has a value, and the value needs to be in place in order to achieve these projects. So you don't need to be driven 100% by the commercial aspects, but you need to understand the needs, the requirements, the gap, and fulfill part of that one as a value for the region and the work you want to do. When these aspects, many projects will come up, and they will be interested. I'm more than happy to support. Definitely today I'm engaged in doing the work, actually work I'm doing, but more than happy for anything which has a good course, which like healthcare, to support the projects that I would like to work in the region.
So this is the last question where we were able to sort of mine all of the terrific background that you have and experience and trust that you've been globally. What final recommendations do you want to leave the audience, and or questions you want to leave the audience?
Well, very, very good. Having spent my whole career in healthcare, where it's an interesting space for me. I always had the curiosity to learn. I continue, and I never regretted a single day that I spent in healthcare space. And my recommendation, for anything you want to do, you need to love to do that. If you are not being able to really loving what you do, you cannot keep up and doing it the right way. Two, you need to have the curiosity, because the curiosity keep you always understanding what's going on. And today, technology has become part of the healthcare, so you need to keep yourself to date all the time. So not being able to keep up with the latest technology, that will make you backward. So my recommendation always, you should love what you do and you'll succeed.
Well, you definitely embody all of that, and You definitely embodied continued curiosity and learning. And of course, you are one of the most trusted figures in the world. So, Malek, thank you for coming in and bringing your tremendous background of expertise, wisdom, and insights to my audience.
Well, finally, I would like to thank you. It's always a great pleasure. And always interacting with you is a learning for me also. So, and keep up this friendship or relationship that we keep on, well, built on.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.